Welcome to this week's edition of MANstream Media, a place where you're going to get male-friendly issues about the news and what's going on with the world today. And tonight we're going to be talking about an interesting topic that we have probably the world's best expert on here with us, and that's Warren Farrell. Warren out in San Francisco. Can you say hello, Warren?
I am really looking forward to tonight's program.
We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And we also have Paul Elam with us tonight.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Hello, Paul. And the issue tonight is the wage gap. And you know, in my book, the wage gap is the issue that simply will not die. No matter how many times it gets killed, it just keeps popping back up. It's the strangest thing. And if anybody's ever seen that Monty Python movie, Holy Grail, you know, where Arthur goes through the woods and he meets the Black Knight. The Black Knight confronts him, and they have a battle, and Arthur cuts off his arm, then the other arm, then the leg, and the other leg. And the knight, what does he do? He says, it's only a flesh wound. It's only a flesh wound. And that reminds me of the wage gap. Because it's like the wage gap just keeps saying, it's only a flesh wound. It's crazy. I mean, we've got Obama talking about the wage gap. We've got politicians. We've got the media. It just keeps coming back over and over again, no matter how many of its limbs you cut off. And probably the person in the world who has cut off the most limbs of the wage gap is with us tonight, and that's Warren. And he's written a beautiful book on it. And we'll let him tell us what he thinks about the wage gap. And Warren, why don't you get us started?
When I started to do the research on this, it was because, you know, I realized it actually started when I was conducting demonstrations. When I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women, I was in charge of the Women's Strike for Equality, the men's section of that. And so here I am, just doing these demonstrations on men get paid $1 for men get paid $1 for every cent that women get paid for the same work, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, if that's really true, I'll go out there and I'll start, hundreds of firms and only hire women, and I'll therefore be able to produce products for 76 cents that other companies have to charge $1 for, and I'll be able to sort of really, make a killing. And so I said, I wonder, but then as I started thinking about it in pragmatic terms, I thought to myself, well, why would anyone ever want to hire a man if a man costs $1 and a woman costs only 76 cents? That's the reverse. That's the opposite of everything that capitalism is based on. So something didn't sort of like figure for me. And then in later years, after I wrote The Myth of Male Power, I started to think, that the one thing that people always would come to me about was, well, I don't see how, Warren, you can say that patriarchy is not a system designed by men to benefit men at the expense of women. The wage gap is a perfect example that men have figured out a way of undervaluing women so that they earn more for the same work as men do. And I realized that this is not going to be, this really has to be dealt with in a very great depth. So I started looking at what created the gap between men and women's pay. And I looked at things, for example, like when men are medical doctors and women are medical doctors, men who are medical doctors do get paid more than women who are medical doctors, and that seemed pretty good evidence that the men really were discriminated in favor of. But as I started taking a magnifying glass to it and realized that the men who are medical doctors was a broad category, and that broad category had men and women in it. And the males were more likely to be cardiac surgeons, the women were more likely to be general practitioners. And cardiac surgeons, whether male or female, got paid significantly more than general practitioners. So I started controlling for just cardiac surgeons versus cardiac surgeons, or general practitioners versus general practitioners. And I found that the pay gap difference between men and women was much reduced. But there was still a pay gap between men and women. And so I figured, well, that must be the discrimination gap. And then I started looking more carefully and realized that there was that was not exactly true either, that the men who were cardiac surgeons had worked more years as cardiac surgeons. They had more specialization. They were more likely to work in private practice as opposed to HMOs. And so when you controlled for the number of years both cardiac surgeons or general practitioners had worked, and you controlled for the amount of degrees they had and the fact that they both worked in private practice or both worked for HMOs, then I started seeing something very different. which was that women got paid slightly more than the men under many circumstances, or sometimes most circumstances. There's so many overlapping variables you can't determine precisely the difference between male and female wages. But overall, as I started looking at pay gap after pay gap, I found that that when I looked, the more closely I looked at it, the more the male-female difference disappeared. I did find out, however, that women who have never been married and never had children earn 117% of what men who have never been married and never had children earn. And I thought to myself, now that's interesting. Women earn more than men? And then I said, well, it must be for different work. And so I started looking at the work, the hours, the years, and so on. And the figure of 117% was after you control for the amount of education, the number of years work, and the age of the worker. And so I started saying, well, what's that about? And I realized that that women who have never been married start focusing a lot more on their career, especially if they've never been married and never had children. And so they had careers that were a lot more like male careers. Whereas males who had never been married, they were much more likely to be the French literature majors or the artists or the art historians, or they didn't have to worry about supporting 3 or 4 people, so they went out and did more risky things that were more fulfilling, that were more artistic in their orientation, and their pay was lower. And so there was, so I began to start seeing that there was, that something was deeper here than met the surface. And as the more I looked, the more I was able to identify 25 differences in male-female work-life choices. Every single one led the male to earning more money and led the female to having a more balanced life. And so that was really fascinating to me. And so as I looked more closely, I started seeing that the men, each time that they made a decision, that they did things that women weren't necessarily wanting to do, like take a hazardous job, or move to the middle of Alaska to do Alaskan fisheries, or to oil refinery work, or to do things that most everybody didn't want to do, or to work in sewers, or work as a garbage collector. And so we had statistics that said that women with college degrees, maybe like an art historian or a French literature major, they earn less than men who are garbage collectors that didn't have college degrees. Well, that seemed like discrimination against men. But when you started to interview women about, are you interested in being a garbage collector so you can earn more money, the answer was, I don't think so. And so when you started controlling for what creates more pay, I found that the road to high pay is basically a toll road. You get high pay in exchange for working more for somebody else on their terms. If the company in Des Moines, Iowa has just had a problem and they need a new manager, and you live in your favorite place in the country and you have to move to Des Moines, Iowa and ship the family there, the man who has 3 or 4 people to support is likely to say, sorry, we all have to move to Des Moines, Iowa. He then gets a greater wage for moving to Des Moines, Iowa, or for being a national sales rep and moving all around the country, than does the woman who says, no, I really want to live in New York with my family, or I want to live where I really enjoy living in the South, or whatever is my favorite city. And so the greater degree to which the employee flexes for the needs of the company is the greater degree to which that person earns money. And women who have never been married and never had children tend to be very flexible. And women who have children, who are married, whose husbands are earning decent incomes, they tend to be very inflexible because they have the children's need to watch out for. They're putting a lot more work into the home and into the family. And so the pay gap, I found, was not between men and women. It was between fathers and mothers. When fathers and mothers are married and have children, which by definition is fathers and mothers, when they're married and have children, that's when the pay gap accentuates. And the more that the woman works in the home, the more the man works outside of the home, and therefore the more he tends to make in comparison to the woman working in the home. Conversely, the more the woman works outside the home, the less the man makes outside the home, but the more housework and childcare he does in the home. So the great majority of married couples actually have a very fair working arrangement. If one is working more outside, the other one starts to work more inside and vice versa. And so those were some of the, and I was concerned about this because I have two daughters, they're in their 20s, and if I wanted a world which was fair for them, and so I cared about the pay gap on that more human level as well, that there not be a world in which I think that even if women earn 1% less than men for the same for the same work, for the same hours, the same hazards, the same times, the same inflexibilities on weekends, the same working environments. These are some of the variables. Even if women earn 1% less when all was the same, we'd have to look at the misogyny in the culture on that issue. As it turns out, that is not the case. And after I published Why Men Earn More and the Truth Behind the Wage Gap and What Women Can Do About It, a few years later, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics did a re-examination of the wage gap, and they came basically to the same findings I did. They didn't measure the same number of variables, but even with fewer variables measured, they found that the wage gap between men and women was virtually minimal. And so the importance of, for me, the importance of Why Men Earn More is that it gives any woman who does want to focus on earning money, it gives her everything she needs to do, all the 25 changes she can make in work-life balance to earn more money if that's her primary goal. And it can be a very valuable goal for a woman to earn money who, let's say is a woman who really feels she has something to contribute as a novelist, but she's afraid that working 4 or 5 years in a novel is just not viable economically, especially if she has a child. So she may wish to go off and study to be an engineer, and work and make more money as an engineer, save up enough money to be able to spend 4 or 5 years working in a novel. So you can use the higher pay information to make sacrifices for 4 or 5 years, especially in your 20s when you're young and you have a little bit more vigor, and then go around and use that to have some play, to do something really creative in the next 4 or 5 years of your life. And so it frees women to know what the trade-offs are and what their decisions are, so that they can make decisions that really free them, rather than decisions that imprison them. So I think that the feminist movement has done a great disservice to women. They've made women into professional victims of saying, and getting even people like President Obama to say, here's an extremely rational man who clearly knows that men don't earn $1 for each 76 cents that we earn for the same work. And yet, despite that power of the feminist movement to make him feel like he can get more votes by saying something that's so false and using men so negatively and misusing men, leads a person of the greatest rationality to lie like that, in front of the entire nation.
I think, just to be fair to the president, I really believe that if he had lost the election, that we would have Mitt Romney standing up saying, I have binders full of women that were paid less than men, like he did during the debates.
Both.
Go ahead.
Both presidential candidates, Republicans and Democrats, for the last 20 years have made that comment. So this is a nonpartisan statement. I'm just amazed as someone who's a constitutional lawyer, who's Mr. Facts, can get up there and lie so blatantly. So maybe it's my higher expectation for somebody like him than I have for me.
So it's certainly understandable. I think part of the point here, and again, I'm always fascinated to sit and listen to Warren explain this, and I've heard him do that before. I read the book. I have listened to him talk about the wage gap before. I saw his demonstration that he put on, I believe it was at the Cato Institute, where he asked the men and women to stand up based on job experiences, whether they had been exposed to the elements or other dangers and hardships, whether they traveled, how many hours they put in, and demonstrated very effectively that the wage gap is about choices, and that wage parity is to be found often, I'm sorry to say, but it's true, it's found in blistered hands. It's found in bodies that are damaged. It's found in being exposed to the elements. It's found in early graves. In many cases, this is where the wage disparity is. And I certainly don't fault women for their choices, and I wish we could work with men and get them to understand that there are choices for them in life too, that they don't have to feel compelled to do anything in particular for a living. I know for myself that I had great ambitions as a teenager and in my early 20s that I wanted to be a writer. And there was something that just swept over my consciousness that said, no, that's not practical. You can't do that. You must go to school. You must work. Forget about that because you have obligations. And I didn't even have a wife at the time. But it was this programming to tell me that I must pursue after money at all costs. And I did. And I've done some dangerous things in my life for a living in order to fulfill that. I think what we saw happen, unfortunately, and this is where I think one area where feminists really got it wrong. I mean, they had it right in the respect, because I remember being, 12, 13 years old, and reading the want ads in newspapers, and it was very clear that the decent jobs that were in there, quote unquote decent jobs, but the jobs that were considered important and higher wage, all the ads were geared toward men. And then they actually had a women's section for women's jobs. I remember this very clearly, and they were all like Girl Friday and receptionist and what have you. And I remember thinking even at that time that hardly seemed fair. And I think one of the things that was positive, although I'm probably going to get some stones thrown at me, that's okay, that I think was positive about the feminist movement is that it gave women the sense that their destiny was not dictated by their sex, that they could explore and become and pursue dreams, and that life couldn't be dictated to them based on genitalia. And I think that's a great thing. I think it was something that was drastically needed in society, considering the technology of the times and the fact that we didn't need to be out there having a man at the entrance to the cave to protect the family in that way anymore. But on the other hand, we have never changed that message to men. And it is an imbalance that's been created about that. And I think feminists have helped lock that imbalance in by encouraging women to flood low-paying expectations and then telling them they're being screwed and that they're being disadvantaged by going into arts degrees and what have you, which have historically paid a lot less than hard sciences and which paid less than skilled labor in many cases. Women flooded those occupations, those offices, and then began sending the message, we're being treated unfairly. No, you're not. What is unfair is to expect the same pay when you're exercising options that are designed to increase your to enhance your lifestyle, which again I think that needs to be spread out across the board. Men should do more of that. Women should probably step up and do more work that is not traditional for them. But it is, to me, Warren has beat this myth to death. He literally did cut the legs off the knife, and the arms. And unlike the picture, I don't think Warren even left the head. I think what we got is a head sitting on the ground, screaming, "Come back! I'll bite you in the ankle. The wage gap is still alive." I really think that's what we have going on here, because we do have politicians from all parties, everybody, across the media, newscasters parroting the 77 cents on a dollar, and I guarantee you none of them have read any of the AAUW studies. And it was actually the feminist studies that have pointed out all along, once people get past the description, the preamble to the studies, and get actually into the meat of the research, they find that when you factor weight for different variables, that there really is no wage gap. So this is a political action, and we can fight with them all day long, and I guarantee you next week in USA Today somebody will be bemoaning the way that women are unfairly paid. I think what we need to do really is have a dialogue with our sons and daughters about their choices in work, and to encourage them exploration and consideration of options that society is still not going to tell them. young women will be told, well, you can be anything you want to be, but you're going to get screwed. And this is a terrible, I've heard Warren mention this before, and I never really thought about it until he put it a particular way. But this is a terrible disservice. What does it do to the identity of women if you lie to them and convince them that they're being shafted and that they're being treated as inferior? Well, the natural result, of course, is that they are going to mistrust and blame men for the other side of it. It is going to widen that gender gap between the two. It's not going to serve any kind of healing. It's not going to bring men and women together. It's not going to help people understand the nature of choices and real solutions. All it's going to do is make people feel like victims and make innocent people also feel like perpetrators. I know that when I believed that wage gap myth, that I felt a certain sense of guilt, that I felt powerless to do anything about it, because I thought, here we are, we got half the human race that's being shafted. I'm an advocate for human beings, and yet I can do nothing about this. And it seems intractable and unreachable and unfair. But thankfully, the real information has come out, and I think it's just important that we start having a dialogue with our children as they grow about options, and let boys and girls both know that they have choices about what they want to be and what they want to do in life, and advise them that society on both sides of the fence will probably try to push them in particular directions, but it is their job in life to seek out what they want and to make choices for themselves that enhance income, enhance lifestyle, or try to find a balance between the two. And we usually don't give them that option. We usually just raise children to say, work, do this, get married, find a husband, be a doctor, be a lawyer, but we really don't sit down and nurture their sense of having options. And I think if we're not going to get politicians to start telling the truth, or academicians to start telling the truth, or people in the media, we can start telling the truth to our children. And we can let them know that their future is in their hands, and it's not dictated by what the AAUW has to say. That's what I got on that.
Indeed, I agree, Paul. I think that you hit on something that's really important, and that is the whole idea of victimhood. Because it boils down to that what's been pushed has been for women to see themselves as being victimized by an oppressive system. And that's what makes Warren's book so potent, is that he's literally empowering women. He's saying, here's what you can do if you'd like to make more money. So in my mind, this is what the feminists should have done, a long time ago. It's just exactly what Warren did. Says, okay, you want to make more money? Here's what you do. Do this, 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 and this. That's what makes that book so powerful, at least the way I see it.
I'm curious, Warren, if you've had feedback from women who have assumed there was a pay gap that based on gender that disadvantaged them, and their reaction to what you had to say in the book that would help them move toward making more income if that's what their desire was.
Yes, when women read it who are not sort of who have not bought into the feminist ideology that there's really men discriminating as women, so when they approach it with an open mind, and particularly when they approach it for their daughters and they say, I really want my daughters to have maximum options, and so I'm reading this book with my daughter in mind, that's when I get very good response from women to the book, because they start seeing sort of like their daughter maybe is talking to them about, say, majoring in anthropology, and I have a section in the book sort of about follow your bliss. It's the money you miss. And so, up until that point, she's saying, gee, go in, if anthropology is what you want, sweetie, you go right into it, or if sociology is what you want, you go right into it. And then she's saying, no, let me think about this. Where is your balance between doing what your passion is and doing what money is? We're told that if you do what you really want to do, if you follow your bliss, then everything else will follow from that. And that is true if you work 60, 70, 80 hours a week and you're a good business person and you know a lot about strategy and you plan well, you can follow your bliss and make money. But to follow your bliss and make money, to be the actor or the starving artist, to be the top-notch artist, the people who are the top-notch artists, the top-notch actors, the top-notch writers, the top-notch thinkers, those are people who have two things in common. In addition to it being a bliss and a gift, it is also something that they put huge amount of hours into making themselves at the top of their field. And they also are good business people, or they hook up with good business people with whom they share the profits. And so you can do that. I'm sure each of us, we spend a great deal of our time doing things that we really care about passionately. But I know that for each hour that we do these things, we don't get paid commensurately for that. We have to think of another way of bringing in an income. So I do find that mothers of daughters who want their daughters to sort of really think through the trade-offs that they make, especially as they either choose careers or choose college majors, they seem to be the most responsive to it. And men seem to sort of get it much more quickly, sort of initially, because they know the type of choices that they've made and why they've made those choices. We started, I know, in my own life, I realized that summer, if I wanted to ask a girl, if I was getting an interest in girls, I realized that interest was coming when I was 14 or whatever, and so that I'd have to spend the summer mowing a lot of lawn to be able to get the money to pay for the gas, and then eventually to be able to pay for a car, to be able to take a girl out. And so I began to learn that I had to do things I didn't like doing, like mowing lawns in New Jersey in the middle of August, in order to make the money to be able to pay for romance and love. And you sort of begin to learn that as a guy at an early age. So guys get it almost instinctively, because all of our lives that we have made decisions to do things we don't like. There's a beautiful new series on TV about how we got where we are now. And it talks about how we got clean water, how we got electricity. And so I'm just watching the Clean Water series, and it's on, sponsored by PBS. And they take you down into the sewers that are built under almost every city, and what life was like in those cities with the filth and the with Ebola. Now there's a lot of attention to public sanitation. Well, before there was these sewer systems built under the city, the food and the water and the filth and the dirt was all out on the streets, and there were lots and lots of diseases that occurred from that. But what no one asks when we flush the toilet, we don't go with our imagination into the sewer systems and see the roaches and the rats there, and the men that are there constantly every day repairing those sewer systems. The feminists aren't out there saying, we want equal numbers of women in those sewer systems.
Not yet, they're not.
And so it'd be interesting to see a protest in the sewer systems for equal numbers of women in the sewer systems, led by Gloria Steinem, etc. So it would be, but those types of appreciations for the men all around us who are doing the hazardous work of picking up our garbage and building our homes and building our bridges and welding, and we eat salmon or crab. We don't ask, where does this come from? What are the hazards that it took? Who are the guys that work on the oil rigs that risk their lives so we can turn on our heat at our convenience during the day? And so these are the people that are very frequently working in the underbelly of our society, that are doing things that really nobody wants to do, but they're doing it because they earn more money than an art history major might earn. And so that's our appreciation for both them and our ability to tell our daughters, if you do want to earn more money, the hazardous jobs are open to you. The military, for example, women in the military get promoted at a faster rate than men in the military. You can be an executive, and a huge study by UCLA of women who were executives before the age of 30 found that a much higher percentage of women who became executives before the age of 30 than men. Women don't get to the very top because somewhere after the age of 30, they're much more likely to make a decision to be in the home, or they're much more likely to make a decision saying, I have my $200,000 a year. Will my lifestyle improve much more by earning $1 million versus $200,000? And most women are intelligent enough to know there's not a big gap in lifestyle by working twice as many hours or 40% more hours to earn significantly more pay. but it will be pay that I won't have a chance to enjoy. I won't have a chance to be have alone time, to do exercise, to be with my husband, to be with my children, to take vacations. People who earn huge amounts of money usually work 60, 70, 80 hours a week to do that. In the process, they often give up their real life, and that's the to me, that's the research in why men earn more and what women can do about it. That's most important, is that this is not about earning money as being privilege and power. The people who are the happiest are not the ones who earn the most money. The people who are the happiest are the ones who figured out a proper balance of trade-offs in their life in relation to their values and what they want. And that's the decision making that we have to help our daughters and sons do.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me of the one of the stats, Warren, that I found so fascinating was the NBAs. That the NBAs from some school, I forget what it was, 79% of the males who got MBAs were in it for the money. They wanted to make more money. But only 29% of the women who got the MBAs were interested in making money. I thought that was really fascinating and very telling.
Yes, their primary interest. This is women who have MBAs now, as Tom is saying, and so here these are not the average woman. These are women who were focused enough on career to go for an MBA. Even among those women, measured against men going to the same universities, they found that the women, 76% of the men and 29% of the women, had as their primary goal earning money. So we asked them, well, what is women's primary goal? And the primary goal was either fulfillment, safety, flexibility, that is proximity to their home, all of which are extremely good values and important values. It's just that if you are, for example, have an opportunity to be a national sales rep for a company, and that means usually you have to travel all over the country and often overseas to be a national sales rep, but you don't have the option of being home when you want to go to your daughter's or son's recital, to cheer for them at their baseball or their soccer game. And so these are things you miss out on when you choose to focus on money, and it's why it's often the pay gap can really be seen to a large degree as a punishment gap, a gap to which men make themselves more enslaved to someone else's needs in order to earn the money that someone else spends, while often they die sooner. And we've taught men to define power as feeling obligated to earn money somebody else spends while we die sooner. And a really good example of that is, we have the feminist ideology out there saying that, the patriarchy is about these male bosses who don't appreciate women. And I really bought into that when I was on the board of NOW. And when I started looking more carefully at that, I found something very fascinating, which was when the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics for years has kept track of women business owners and male business owners. What women and male business owners have in common is that they have no bosses. So if we look at the gap in pay, if there is any, between women who have no bosses and men who have no bosses, we get a sense of the real decisions that women business owners versus men business owners make and what that leads to in terms of pay gap. Well, male business owners earn 100% for each 49%. In other words, female business owners earn only 49% of what male business owners earn. And so the pay gap is much greater between women who own their own businesses and men who own their own businesses than it is for women versus men who are hired by most frequently male bosses.
That's fascinating.
Go ahead, Tom.
I love the idea of a punishment gap. I think that's right on the money, Warren. That's right on the money. You don't see that very often. Although it does bring up a question for you, Warren, that I'd like to ask you. If indeed non-married, non-childbearing women make 117% of what non-married and non-childbearing men make, does that mean that there is a wage gap and there is actually men being discriminated against?
It doesn't, first of all, it's a really good question. It doesn't per se, because there's so many things that go into it. We don't know what the motivations of these women are versus the motivations of men. Women do tend to be more security conscious, and so when a woman sees herself as being, not being likely to be married, she also probably self-selects for a certain amount of independence. Sort of I want to be my own person. I want freedom and so on, and she sort of sees that a little bit about her personality. And so we don't know enough about the different personality structures of the women who earn more and the men who earn more to really come to that conclusion. What we do know is that in many professions, like for example, a woman who is a sales engineer earns on average 143% of what a male sales engineer earns. So you ask, well, why would that be? 143% of what a male sales engineer earns? And one of the reasons is if you just think about it from a logical perspective, if you're Boeing, you're getting government contracts. You have a certain mandate if you get government contracts to hire a certain percentage of engineers who are women. Once those engineers are hired, you have a certain mandate to make sure you don't just drop them out, but you promote them. But also, let's say you're a male who is an executive vice president in charge of choosing the next engine for a plane, and you have a male versus a female sales engineer that you have a chance of meeting with. The average male top executive has more interest in meeting with a female than he does with a male. His tendency to discriminate in favor of the attractive female out there leads him to be willing to listen to that female sell to him. And our response as males when we are presented with a problem by females is to respond positively. So hence you have all these pharmaceutical companies hiring very attractive younger women that are also extremely competent to go out there selling pharmaceuticals to doctors for the same type of reasons. And so, because we know us guys, we're just, we the male doctor, and, et cetera. And so,
I know, Warren, they sell beer the same way.
Yes, exactly. And so there is a lot of discrimination in favor of women. And think about going to the last time you went to a dentist. Now imagine you're sitting back in the dentist, and the dentist deals with you, but then you have a male dental hygienist working on you. And would you rather have the male dental hygienist working on your teeth or the female dental hygienist working on the teeth? Well, 10% of the people who graduate from dental hygienist school used to be men, but only 1.5% of the people hired as dental hygienists are men. And when I asked my dentist about that, he said, I would never hire a guy as a dental hygienist. And I said, well, you're a man. You put your fingers in women's mouths. What's wrong with that? And we talked about it and realized that when a doctor puts his fingers in a woman's mouth, it's okay. But when a non-doctor male puts his fingers in women's mouth or a woman's vagina, if it's an OBGYN, a male nurse going into a woman's naked body is not okay. If he's a doctor, we let it be. And so there's these multi-levels of subtle discrimination against men that no one ever talks about in many professions. Think of a cocktail waiter, and so on.
I can see a button coming right now. I can see a button coming, and it says 83 cents on the dollar, baby.
Right.
Yeah, but nobody would pay attention to that button, Tom.
They would laugh, Paul.
I think it's really, really great that we have Warren has done this kind of research, because here's the deal for me, and it is the difference between evidence-based understanding of problems and ideological understanding of problems. And that is a huge difference that impacts our culture, our society in so many ways. It's just not funny. Feminists do what I call the double sweep. They look, when they want to define what women need and want, they look at the upper 1 percentile, the very top 1% of men, and they say that defines all men. So all men have all this money, all this power, and we want it that way. And when they're talking about what they think is wrong with men, they turn the other direction and they go to the lower 1% of men, the 1%, and they say that's all men. And whichever circumstance they're in, whichever serves their ideological purpose, they will point to either that lower or upper 1% and say that is the definition of all men, and this is what justifies us moving forward with our agenda. And unfortunately, this approach does not work very well when you start considering things like facts and like actual research and numbers. It actually sort of blows up in their face.
Yeah.
But with the tendency in this culture toward gynocentrism, which is to favor women in all matters, then you still will have politicians walking around when they know it's not true, saying that 1 in 5 women will be raped by the time they finish college, and that women are paid 77 cents on the dollar, and all sorts of other bogus statistics. But I just wanted to offer a word of thanks. Warren has done what feminists really never did or never came out with. They found, I think, some of the same answers that he did when they were doing their research, and they just molded the research. If you look at Murray Strauss's paper on how research is molded and fashioned and packaged for consumption, you get a lot of why a AAUW study from 2007 actually concluded there was no pay gap, but was marketed and branded and pushed as though there was. That's exactly what happened. So this information is out there. I want to just take a moment to recommend that if you are in positions where you're arguing this, because if you're in any kind of activism, if you're in any kind of ongoing discussions with people about issues on gender, you will run into this every day of your life. Somebody will be telling you, when you talk about how men are not necessarily getting a very good deal in family court, of course, the intelligent ideological response is to say, well, oh yeah, well, my grandmother couldn't vote in 1920, and women still make 77 cents on the dollar to men. Totally wiping out what you're talking about. It's good to be armed with information. I'd suggest checking out Warren's book. It is available on Amazon, as far as I know, because you will get what he's been talking about here. And he is. Tom wasn't kidding when he said, we've got the world's foremost expert right here on the wage gap. And we do. It's Warren Farrell. He knows his stuff inside and out. He did exhaustive research and really went into the finite details of the numbers, because, again, when you're talking to somebody that's wailing about a wage gap, it's important to remember you're talking to somebody that feels like, honestly, that they're being screwed. Mm-hmm. And rather than tell them they're whining, it can be a really effective strategy to say, why don't you look at this? Why don't you consider that you have options and that you can beat this? You may be talking to somebody that can't pay their electric bill. That happens, you know. And it's real easy to feed into these myths about oppression and about discrimination that don't exist if you need explanations for very, very negative things that are going on in your life. Simply giving somebody the information, in a lot of cases when somebody's ideologically driven, they don't care about the facts at all. They'll take Warren's book and toss it and say, no, Warren is full of it. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Women get paid less for the same work as men, and not even acknowledging the fact that women don't actually even do the same work as men. There can't even, I mean, in some cases they do, but generally speaking, if you look at the gender distribution in blue-collar culture, Warren, do you have any idea what the numbers are on that?
Yes, well, we know, for example, that 93% of the people who are killed in hazardous jobs are males. And so that's a reflection, but that's really not even an adequate number, because, for example, firefighters are fairly likely to get killed are not that likely to get killed in their job, but they're likely to have problems with lungs and die of indirect effects of their job years later, and those indirect effects of the hazardous jobs are not recorded as death at work. So the 93% figure significantly understates that. But in all the 10 most hazardous jobs, which are not police, by the way, but all planes and spraying pesticides, or Alaskan fisheries, or welding on bridges, roofing, construction. Those are jobs that are among the hazardous jobs. One construction worker dies in the United States every workday hour. Those jobs are almost all male jobs. The more hazardous the job is, the more likely it is to be done by a male. And most of the safety regulations that have occurred, that were created by the government to make those jobs safer, happened after, ironically, a female was killed. So, for example, in construction, there was a rafters that were not safe fell, and the construction workers and the rafters fell and killed a female pedestrian. And it was at that point that the safety laws were accelerated and passed through Congress. And so you have that dimension of it. It's also so crucial here on an everyday level for a mom and a dad who have a daughter saying, you say to your daughter, what would you like, sweetie? And she said, well, I really want to be a have-it-all woman. I really want a top-notch career. I want a good marriage. I want to have children who are not just raised by a nanny, but raised by the family and raised successfully. How do I do that? And the world seems like, I very rarely hear an answer to that question. There is a good answer to that question. If you have the type of daughter, or you are the type of person yourself, who is very ambitious and who really cares about making a statement and contributing to the world through earning money, then find a man who is interested, and you want to have children, and that find a man who is the type of man who cares a lot about raising children, who's a nurturing man, who listens well, who sets good boundaries, and you'll have your choice of a lot of men, because a lot of women aren't looking for men who are reading I'll be a good dad in an unemployment line. But the man reading, the man interested in that is many kind, caring, loving men are usually, they want to also work from home and try to do something. It might be something experimental from home. It might be something that that it doesn't have a guarantee of earning money, but nevertheless, he's a creative guy, wants to work at home, is happy to be with children. We now know from the Pew Research Center that 49% of men who work full time say that if it wasn't for income, they would prefer to be with their children full time, not part time, not more time, but full time. This is the 2014 study by the Pew Research Center. So you have a huge number of men out there who want. So if the woman who wants to be a have-it-all woman can marry a man who's home with the children while maybe he does or does not do other things, and children that are raised predominantly by men, but that also have their mothers in their lives, do better than any other single demographic of children in 30 some odd areas of success. Social success, psychological success, physical health success, and academic success. So you have the possibility of a woman who in good conscience wants to earn money. She needs to know that when UCLA finds out how quickly women who are interested in being executives get promoted, that they are promoted in the top 100 Fortune 100 company to the executive level faster, much more likely to be promoted under 30 to the executive level in top 100 companies than are their male counterparts. So if she doesn't buy the ideology of discrimination and looks at what the reality is, she can see a very good future for herself in the workplace, a very good future for her children being taken care of by a loving husband. And the only major caveat is that the husband has to know that she appreciates him and treats him as a hero, if you will, for being at home. If he senses disrespect by her because he doesn't earn money, the entire program falls apart. Men are happy to do it if they feel respected and loved,
Yes.
Not happy to do it if they don't feel respected and don't love. That's when the relationship falls apart.
And that is, I think, the great crisis we have with all the divisions that have been created between men and women. One of the most heartbreaking results of that is that so many men don't feel honored and loved, either in their workplaces or their homes or wherever they go, no matter what they do. And I think that's a cultural time bomb that we're just now starting to see explode. I want to change focus a little bit and ask Warren, and you too, Tom, another question. I want to take the focus off of the subject and put it on me, which is extremely important for me to do. I'm just wondering, I look at all the activists for feminist ideology out there, and some of them have some incredible salaries. If you look at what some of these people make that work through the UN, $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year, and here I'm a gender activist, and I have to run around and scrape and beg money. Is there somebody I can sue?
Tom Golden is responsible for that difference.
It's all my fault.
It has to be somebody's fault.
Sounds like another button, Paul.
Yes. I think that I am the greatest example of the wage gap that ever existed.
Yes.
I think I make 4.5 cents to the dollar.
Yes.
on women advocates.
Yes, and I think that's exactly right, and I think that it sort of hums along with the theme we've had tonight, which is really gynocentrism is the biggest piece of shutting down this whole wage gap thing and keeping it underneath the covers, and it's something we live with. It's just in our blood. It's all around us, and I can't recommend enough that gynocentrism.com site of Peter Wright's. I mean, he really is saying something of extreme importance, because all of our bewilderment about what this wage gap thing, why won't people listen? It's explained really, if you think about it, in terms of gynocentrism. And it's frustrating, but it is a bit of an explanation.
I hope at some point, Tom, that we can do one of these programs on the subject of gynocentrism. It's a word that some people don't like. It's a word that for other people it explains a lot. But for whatever it's used for, gynocentrism is something that deserves exploration and discussion and weaving into our understanding of these issues. In my mind, it is not a horrible, terrible word that connotes anything wrong about women. It is simply a word that describes our tendency in this culture to place women first in all circumstances and to consider their problems before we consider the problems of others. And I do think that results in a lot of these difficulties. The challenge is, how do you confront gynocentrism without pointing a finger at half the human race and saying you're the problem, because we don't want to repeat what so many feminists have done. We don't want to point and say there's this system out there like patriarchy, and it means you're all bad. And we get guys in the men's movement, they burn out very quickly, that come in with that attitude, and they either find themselves having to shape that and change it and renew their understanding, or they end up burning out because there's just not much room for genuine women hating around our circles, which is, I think, is a good thing.
It's all about survival. It's literally all about survival. It's not about oppression. It's not about one group making the other ones slaves. It's about survival. All of these things, the gynocentrism evolved so that we could survive, so that we could thrive and do well. So it's a matter of kind of raising people's consciousness about how those things that drove us to survive and do well are really not going to do so well in today's culture. It's like Warren keeps saying this over and over again, that very thing, that we need to find ways so the boat is rowed from both sides,
yes,
not just from one, is what we're having today. And I've been meaning to put up Warren's book for people who haven't seen it before. There's the cover of that book. It's a wonderful book, and if you read this book, you will have all the ammunition you need to speak very articulately about the wage gap. It's a fantastic book. It's a very positive book for women. If women out there want to learn how to make more money, get this book. If MRAs out there want to learn how to argue their side of things, get this book. And that's where I'll stop on that one.
And if you simply just want to understand why there's a difference in pay between men and women, your own peace of mind about the subject. It's a fantastic, comprehensive more research than you'll ever get from television.
For me, I hope that the book's major contribution from my perspective is that if you have any young person who's thinking about what do I want to do in my life, how do I want to balance my life, the most important single word is trade-offs. It is knowing how everything, what are my values? What do I really want? What do I want? How much family? How much am I motivated in sort of to make a contribution in the outside world? This is really a book about what every single decision you make, what is the cost of that decision? What are the benefits of that decision? And those costs and benefits will be different for different people depending on what your values are. And so it's holding those three things together: the cost, the benefits in relation to your values, and that's what each chapter is really designed to do.
Yes. Well said.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, are we getting close to the end?
I think we are, Tom.
Yeah. Last words?
No?
Warren, you want to go first?
Well, I just I was smiling a few minutes ago when you said about the gap on being a female activist versus a male activist. Since, as you know, I was a female activist for quite a long period of time, and I can remember when I first started listening to the men's groups that I was forming and hearing what the men's view of the world was after I'd been on the board of NOW and listening only to the women's view of the world and articulating that and doing very well financially. And so I started to sort of begin to say what some of the men's perspective was, thinking I was going to be really fair and balanced and integrate the men's perspective, and that people would really appreciate me that much more. And as I did this, I started noticing my standing ovations were sort of like getting to be weaker standing ovations. And then as I increased the frequency with which I integrated some compassion for men, it went to sitting ovations, and 3 or 4 speaking engagements, recommendations after each engagement went down to 1 to 0 until eventually I lost almost all my speaking engagements in colleges, even though I was trying to get men and women to walk a mile in each other's moccasins. I was doing men's beauty contests to try to get men to understand what what being looked at as a sex object was like. And that was great, and I was cheered for by feminists, but by the moment I asked the women to take the risks of asking the men out on a role reversal date so they could understand the experiences of rejection that men often go through when they take the risks of rejection, all the women in the audience were open to that, but the feminists in the audience walked out. These were the feminists that had lobbied to pay for me to be there, that had made plans with me to go out for drinks after the presentation. They disappeared the moment I asked them to take responsibility to walk a mile in men's moccasins. And so that's when I went from getting many dollars for each dollar that a gender feminist normally gets to 1/10 of what much less than 1/10 of what I had been getting. So I very much empathize with that journey from gender feminist to gender masculist, if you will, or really gender balanced person.
Yes, indeed. Paul?
I just taken a moment to be grateful that Warren couldn't be bought.
Amen.
It's one of the things that many things that I like about him. No, I think we've covered at least what I want to cover. I mean, we knew the wage gap, at least as it's presented as a product of discrimination, is a myth. There is a wage gap, but there are reasons for it. And I didn't think we were going to end up arguing points about this, and sure enough we didn't, because we all agree about where it's at. I think there is still a lot of confusion as to how we're going to finally kill this lie. I think it's ultimately in the minds of our children by raising them the way Warren with the truth, and because there's no money in the truth, but it is valued to your children. And speaking of money, I just want to send out a great big thank you. We just completed a few days ago our quarterly fundraiser for A Voice for Men. Want to thank you all for helping us meet our goal again. We asked for $25,000 this quarter, and you gave us $27,000. And other contributions, and so we live on to keep pushing. We're in the planning stages of our next conference, and we have some other surprises coming out soon, which I'll look forward to talking to you about either through articles or on this program or Intelligence Report, or perhaps even on Going Mental with Dr. Tara Palmatier. But I want to send a shout out to all the supporters. Thank you so much for believing in our work and for supporting us and taking it to the next step. I'm considered myself very blessed. We've been going strong for 5 years now. We have never failed to meet a fundraising goal, not once. And as always, you guys came through again, and women. We have a lot of female supporters. Just wanted to express some heartfelt gratitude for that, and say I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Good.
Look forward to that too. And Tom, you have a final word?
I was going to say that it's been a good time. I really appreciate Paul's input, but also really appreciate Warren's input. You know, Warren, you have a real skill and knack at understanding the what's underneath things and a capacity to kind of bring it out and show people, and that is just priceless. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate your being here tonight. And we will look forward to seeing you all next Thursday for the next MANstream Media. And don't forget, there is no I in MANstream.